Should we go ahead and get started?
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us to talk about the virtual reality of recruitment and selection for this next upcoming year, given the complications and disruptions that have been caused by COVID-19. Next slide, please. We're going to start with introductions and talking about our goals and objectives for today. Before we do that, I just wanted to go over some brief Zoom etiquette. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to, I'm Jeff Baker, Executive Director for APIC, and sorry about that, Shona. Just wanted to remind people about continuing education credit. You must have registered through APIC sign up. You must be present for the entire meeting. A certificate will be mailed to all of those that attended the entire meeting. Their certificates will be sent to the email address from which you signed up, and APIC is responsible for the content of this presentation.
We're in webinar mode for Zoom, so everyone can participate during the Q&A portion. Please feel free to use the chat box to send in your questions and your thoughts all along. We will send out the chat after the meeting as well. We'll post the chat. Please mute yourself unless you are speaking. If you use the speaker view instead of the gallery view, you can focus on the person who's speaking. APIC's main goal is to share information here and also to facilitate dialogue among our members. We're going to try and be inclusive, and so we ask you during the Q&A portion to limit your comments or questions to no more than 1 minute at a time. And we will be recording this webinar for our training community. Thank you, Jeff. Next slide. I'm going to start with introducing myself. My name is third on the list. I'm Shona Vaz. I'm the secretary on the APIC Board of Directors, and I am a training director at the University of Chicago Medical Center. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Osfed. I'm currently serving on the APIC Board of Directors, and my day job is as a VA psychologist with VA Pacific Islands Healthcare System. I no longer serve in the role of training director, though I have in the past at 2 different VA facilities, and I'm really delighted to be with everyone today as we make our way through these uncharted waters together as a training community. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Shiloh Jordan.
Aloha, I'm Shiloh Jordan. I'm training director at VA Pacific Islands Healthcare System for both the internship and postdoctoral residency programs.
Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Mary Mendoza Newman. I am on the APIC board as well in multiple roles, and also at Stanford University Counseling and Psychological Services as the training director for an internship and a postdoc.
Hi folks, I'm Mark Sampson, and I am the training director at The Ohio State University Counseling and Consultation Services.
Good afternoon. I'm Wayne Siegel. I'm the training director at the Minneapolis VA Healthcare System and also chair of the APIC's postdoctoral committee. Happy to be here.
Okay, next slide, please. All right. Because we are offering CE for this, I thought it would be important to just take a moment to delineate the learning objectives for today. So after participating in the webinar today, we anticipate that participants will be able to list 2 important factors to consider when updating their public materials for their programs in preparation for the upcoming selection cycle. We also hope that participants will be able to describe at least 1 method for developing a virtual tour of their site, low-tech or high-tech. We hope that participants will be able to list 3 methods for conducting virtual or distanced interviews. And we hope that participants will be able to identify one website on which to find resources for virtual recruitment and selection strategies. Next slide, please. And before we jump into those specific objectives for today, we thought it would be prudent to take just a bit of time to refresh everybody on the guidance that the APIC Board of Directors put forth regarding recruitment and selection in these unusual times. Next slide, please. So the full guidance can be found at the link below on this slide on our webpage. If you go to our homepage, there's a button, COVID-19, and if you click on that, you can find a host of information, including resources for virtual recruitment and selection ideas, but also the guidance for how to conduct recruitment and selection during this season. And I'll just to a few of the highlights from that guidance document. The first is that we ask everybody in our training community to work together and to be thinking about the training to service pipeline and how we at each stage, whichever stage in the pipeline we represent and train in, that we focus on competencies and preparing the trainees that we work with in terms of competencies for the next step or the next level and that pipeline of training. So again, we still want to really highlight competencies and be sure that people are competent and prepared to practice as health service psychologists, no matter what stage of training we're engaged in. The next component was encouragement for our internship and postdoctoral training directors to think critically about how they are evaluating competency and readiness for their training programs, knowing that COVID-19 has impacted training across that continuum. So that folks, for example, in practicum level training or an internship level training may not have as many direct service hours as we're used to when we evaluate applications, but that doesn't mean they aren't as competent. So thinking broadly about how we can assess competency and perhaps moving away from an over-reliance on minimum numbers of certain types of hours. If we do rely on minimum numbers of certain types of hours, for example, direct individual psychotherapy hours or direct assessment hours, that we be clear about what those minimum numbers are and clearly communicate them in our public materials. But again, thinking more broadly than hours to assess competency at the application evaluation stage. An important piece of the guidance is the third bullet point here, which is that we are strongly recommending as a psychology training community that we agree to partner with one another and exclusively use remote or virtual interview formats. So again, to exclusively use distance formats for recruitment and selection, given the global pandemic that we all find ourselves in. So we are not mandating that, we are strongly encouraging that. And along those lines, the next bullet point really speaks to the idea of access. And for those of us who are DCTs and training directors, to ensure that all of our applicants, whether it's a doctoral student applying for internship or an intern applying for a postdoc, that we really ensure that they have access to cross the digital divide, and that they also have access to appropriate places to engage in distance interviews from. So if someone does not have internet access, if they do not live in an environment that has a private space, that we as trainers think about how we can support them to engage in this remote and virtual and distance process so that they have equal access to the opportunities of internship and postdoctoral training. Then the next bullet point speaks to the importance of updating our public materials. As I noted earlier, we may be changing the minimum numbers of hours. We might be using different strategies to evaluate readiness for internship or postdoctoral training. And to the extent that we've identified those things, placing them in our public materials is very important. Likewise, to the extent that we're using new and different remote and distanced strategies for recruitment and selection, identifying those and sharing those in our public materials is also important. The bullet point beneath public materials regarding COVID-19 also is important for our public materials. So we know that this is evolving, but it's very important to describe as accurately as you can how your program has adjusted training and responded to training within the context of COVID-19. So what's happening right now in terms of perhaps distance or Zoom didactics versus face-to-face, those kinds of things. To just share that and perhaps share the principles that you're using to guide your thinking around the changes that may happen in the future, because we know that this is an evolving circumstance that continues to change over time. So another important point about public materials is that it may not be the case this year that you update once and then you're done, but rather you return and update throughout the process as new information and new guidance shapes what you're doing locally. And all of this highlights the final piece of our recommendation, which is the importance of communication. It's vital that all of us together as a community communicate regularly and frequently throughout this process. So we highly recommend that we engage in ongoing communication for clarity, and again, in the service of the best training outcomes for our trainees and for the field and for the public that we serve. And that's just a highlight of the guidance. I will turn it over now.
Thank you, Allison. We're going to over to our presenters at this point. Thank you for making the time to share your expertise and your wisdom with us. Mary and Wayne, you are up next.
Excellent, thank you. If we could have the next slide, please, Jeff. Okay, so in alignment with Allison, with what Allison just shared, updating the public materials, we're going to start there because this is something you can begin to certainly have discussions with your training committees about how you're going to proceed with selection this year. And so, of course, as stated, we want to encourage you to post both on your on all of your public materials, all of the processes that you'll be offering this year for selection. And just a reminder that the quality of your public materials really does reflect on the quality of your program. And so taking time to describe all of those details and to update them regularly because things are constantly changing. And also I find that when I send emails, one of the things I do at the end of selection is sample the folks that we interview to ask them for feedback. And one of the things they always say that they valued was constant communication about the process all along the way. Those details do help them navigate to some uncharted territory for themselves. So what's the information that the applicants need to know that should be detailed and accurate is how to apply to your site. You can note that, of course, in your website, and also there's text box in the directory to detail those specifics. Also, what will training experiences entail? So what kinds of training are you offering? How have you adjusted or adapted your training program in light of the pandemic will be important. And then also the interview process. So how will you proceed again with the process this year, and what sort of accommodations have you made to expand on how you're going to evaluate the students for internship? Now they're hot off the press. I just sent them early this morning and they're now posted on the website, the APIC directory updates. It's an 11-page document, so it's long and it's actually very detailed, but the intention there is to support you step by step with updating all aspects of your directory, because again, that is the information that the trainees will be accessing the applicants. And if there's a complaint that we get yearly is that some sites have not updated, and so they're left wondering what requirements or how the training will happen at that particular site. So I really strongly encourage you to update that. If you have any questions, please do contact myself or any of the editors to support you in filling out your profile accurately. And the deadline for that is at the end of the month, July 31st. So I appreciate that. The specific things that you will update, again, are detailed there in the document. It's primarily start dates, application due dates, interview dates. I recognize that some of you may not have this information right now. And the beauty of the directory is that you are able to go in at any time to update this information. So again, as soon as you have that information, please do update that. There's also, so there's space in there to update the applicant and application process, and also to provide a description about your interview process. One of the, because we're strongly encouraging folks to go virtual, there is a new checkbox in there that you could detail how you will be doing interviews this year. Will it be by phone, virtual, through video, or are you actually requiring folks to come in? So all of that information does need to be detailed. And then again, as Allison stated earlier, we do have a policy. It's referenced in the instructions and also on our website for folks to review what we're strongly encouraging folks to, how we would like folks to engage in interviewing this season. And so then I will turn it over to Wayne.
And the next slide. Can you forward it? There we go. So to talk about kind of updating public materials, more specific to postdoctoral programs. So in addition to APIC member postdoctoral programs, they have listings in the APIC DOL that Mary was referring to earlier, and they should be updated accordingly. But the vast majority of postdoctoral programs nationally that are APIC member or non-APIC members are in the UPPD or Universal Psychology Postdoctoral Directory. The link is on the slide, and it's easy. You can easily find that just through Googling it or off the APIC website. And there are several fields that have been that are required to be updated, specific with regard to kind of the interview process. Is at the beginning of June, we had released this for updating. And we want people to update their application field, how that's going to look different under the COVID situation. And then we added a new field similar to the DOL, is about virtual interviews. And the choices are there'll be no virtual interviews, they're available, strongly preferred, or virtual only. I went in this morning, and for programs that have already updated their listings, it's about an 85% rate where virtual interviews are strongly preferred or virtual only. As Mary mentioned, similar to the DOL, the UPPD can be edited at any time. And we realize this is a fluid process. People are figuring out what they're going to do. It's going to evolve as they think about it more. And so you can go in at any point and update that information, and strongly encourage you to keep it as current as possible. Applicants are going to be looking, and this will reflect on your program, and applicants will often email about listings that are not updated or not current, and it doesn't reflect terribly well on your program for that information to be out of date. Also, we wanting you to describe your interview process and adding interview dates to that if that is possible, because that's not a specific field in the UPPD. And then also to reiterate what Mary was talking about, thinking about everywhere your program may be listed. And that could include a program website or a PDF brochure, the APIC main directory, the UPPD, any other directory or lists. And in the postdoc world, there are many emphasis or focus areas like trauma, neuropsych, rehab, that have division websites or other types of directories, and thinking about all the places where your program is listed and getting those that information up to date and current. And then as postings are put out on listservs, and just a reminder, both APIC and VA don't allow for postings of postdoctoral programs on listservs, but many of the APA division and other groups may allow for that. So if you get that information out there, make sure it's current, and adding information in about your availability of virtual interviews. Thank you.
All right, let us move on to our next section. And we welcome Dr. Mark Sampson to talk about virtual tours.
Hello, folks. So if you notice there on the bottom, there is the web link to our virtual tour. It's at the bottom of our psychology internship page. And before I kind of go over the benefits and drawbacks, I just want to say that it looks pretty polished. And at the same time, what I want you to do is kind of picture the fact that it's basically a person holding an iPhone sitting in a chair being pushed throughout the counseling center. So this is something that everybody can do. And so we kind of did our thing, and then we had to like send it to our Ohio State marketing to kind of make it up to standards. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But so the benefits of the virtual tour is, and I've been trained director at a couple of places, and we've done these virtual tours both places. And for social justice reasons, it really allows access to all applicants, and they have the flexibility to view and learn more about you by looking at this tour. And like for ours, it combines a tour, and so we have 2 sites. And so there we push a little chair around both sites and kind of show what the offices look like, the lobby looks like, and group rooms and so forth. And then we also have a section to where each psychology intern talks about what they feel was the benefit of being part of our training program. And so it allows that to, and they are in their offices, so it allows to get the overall view of the counseling center, and then the experience of what the psychology interns really valued about the site. And then I kind of ended up just kind of with my welcome, so they kind of get to see me on video. So it kind of combines different things. And it also, like I said, provides applicants with a glimpse of the lived training experience. Now, some drawbacks are, so the institutional barriers are basically what we did. We honestly just did our little video and we just slapped it up on our webpage. And then OSU said, no, that we have branding, and we have to approve everything that goes on. And so basically, they didn't change very much. They really just made sure that, because we had things like the program that they came from and their logo from the program that they came from, and OSU was like, no, only OSU logos can go on this. And so just little things like that is what we went through our media department. And then what they did was they had some video of like a drone that went across campus, kind of from one center to the other. And so it looks really impressive. But honestly, what I'm telling you is the majority of it is a person sitting on a chair holding an iPhone being wheeled around the counseling center. So it's really something that people can do. And also the next thing with the frequency of updating, what I learned, so what you see on our website now are not our current interns, they are interns from last year. I had made the assumption that every year I could just kind of input the current interns into that section, and there's a limited amount of updating that we could do. So what I found out now is like every other year I can update it. So it's like really important to check in with your media department and really make sure that you are up to their standards. And also, there's a limit to how many videos you can have on a site at OSU. And so we have all of our workshops videos on there and some other things. And so I had to really make the case of like, this is an important video to go there. Another drawback is, even though it's very convenient and they can always come back to it, it does kind of remove that the more personal component to it, to the traditional on-site visit. So that's kind of why I did the video at the end, to kind of warm it up some and make it a little bit more welcoming, because I knew that just that kind of camera going around can come across as cold. So I tried to put a personal touch to it. And then once again, there is less interaction with the site and with the staff. And so there are some limitations, but overall, it is something that that can be easily done. And I think it really benefits because it's on there all the time, and people can always go back to it and kind of refresh their memory. And so feel free to go to that that link to kind of look and see what we've done. And now you kind of know what's behind the scenes with that.
Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about online interviews, and as a backdrop within the VA Pacific Islands training program, we're located in Honolulu, Hawaii, and we've been doing online interviews for at least the last 8 years. And it's essentially an online interview is one in which the candidate responds to interview questions in written format. And you can use an online traditional survey system like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics. What we've found that we really like about using one of these systems is that it gives a time in, time out stamp for candidates. And it also allows like understanding of then how long they spent taking the interview, and also for them to be able to go back to certain questions and add to them as needed as well. We've included everything from traditional interview questions that we would have asked verbally in terms of performance-based interviewing. We've also included vignettes and asked for them to write a sample note to provide a conceptualization or to identify what follow-up questions they would have asked the particular client or patient. And then we've also had segments of transcripts of clinical engagement and asked follow-up questions about conceptualization, diagnosis, treatment planning as well. So it can give a good snapshot of a lot of different aspects of applied work and conceptualization, all within the written format as well. And we have not included embedded video links or anything fancy. We've actually kept it quite simple and within just the structure of one of the online survey systems as well. Next slide. All right, so just to outline some of the benefits and then also the potential drawbacks. It really allows candidates to have flexibility regarding when they engage in the interview. So they, in between, previously when we've done this in between their flights or different times they're traveling for other interviews, Hawaii is a pretty far distance, particularly from the East Coast. And so being able to schedule in when you're doing an interview can be particularly helpful. We typically give a 2-week window in which to participate in the interview and a time limit on which we'd like to have them spend doing the interview. And then they can do the interview at their leisure. It also allows flexibility for when our faculty and staff are going to review the interview materials. And so it releases the burden on the training director or the admin support staff in coordinating a bunch of schedules to set up for the interview process. We also identify as potentially removing biases from the interview process because there's no attention given to mannerisms, dress, accent, charisma, how charming an individual is, and or their funding or lack of funding to be able to attend interviews, which is, I think, particularly important given the expense it would be to visit some sites in person. And candidates are able to pause to give reflective responses within this setup versus being maybe more of a smooth talker. Some of the drawbacks are that they may, candidates can experience less sense of being able to sell themselves in the interview process. So this is some feedback we've received over the years is really they wanted to be able to kind of show some of their best sides. A former candidate even said, part of my charisma is what gets me into places. And so it was really, you know, having to find another way in which to put my best self forward. And so asking a question at the end regarding what makes you a great fit or what do you think you bring to the site can help bridge that gap a little bit. Candidates may have less of a sense of the site, which brings in the idea of a virtual tour, some of those other elements really being helpful. At times they can feel the process can be removed or cold in comparison to a traditional interview because you're not getting the immediate feedback of those nonverbals or those verbals as you would within a normal interaction in a traditional interview setup. And some faculty may be nervous about not having laid eyes on a candidate that is being ranked, not having actually seen them in person or seen them over video in a way to be able, I guess, to evaluate them in that manner. Next slide, please. So here are some tips for just making the most of an online interview, really choosing a reliable technology platform for the interview and then testing it, sending out the link, seeing what's it like. Can candidates move through and back to the questions, or once they advance, are they stuck there? Seeing how that works for your setting. And there's actually, some that are fairly inexpensive or even free versions as well. Setting a specific time expectation for the interview, as I mentioned earlier, on open close dates and time interview can be completed, basically the duration of the time given to engage in the interview as well. Developing a rubric for scoring, and this would be similar as we do for other in-person interviews. So within our system, we have 2 different reviewers so that we try to have good inter-rater reliability and reduction of only one person being the sole gateway to our program. Then review the rubric process and rationale with the faculty to also increase their comfort with the process as well. I just mentioned having those 2 reviewers can also increase the reliability of scoring, and convey interest in candidates and describe the rationale for the online interviews. So this is something we've really learned over time and appreciate more and more, is conveying warmth and sense of the site over the course of increased contact with candidates, and also describing why we're doing an online interview and the rationale. I think it conveys not only continued interest in the candidate, but helps them better understand how we're operating as well. And really encourage countering this with providing the candidates with other information about your program, such as the video of the site, open house, ability to ask questions of faculty, contact with current trainees, public materials that are accurate, as has been described earlier, and increased contact with the training director as well.
Are Mary and Mark up next?
Yes.
Okay,
I-
next
Yep,
slide, please.
All right, Mary, I'll just jump in back and forth here. So
Go for it.
I think that what's important is no matter what type of technology you use, always have a phone number as backup when technology fails. At every year that I've done Zoom interviews, something has happened and we've had to call the people. So make sure that you do have a current number, and it's always good to kind of go back to the good old phone. It tends to be the most reliable. And so back when I was the training director at University of Michigan, I had really strong focus on social justice and phone interviews, because it really allows equal access to all applicants. And so that's the benefit of like people have phones, and it really kind of levels the playing field for all applicants. And some people aren't able to travel, they have limited access. So the phone tends to be the most equal of access to all applicants. And then, we all know, the research on attraction bias, and, a phone takes away much of that bias that we just inherently have, which, attraction bias, mannerisms, dress, accent, etc. It tends to remove that from the interview process. And then it also eliminates the additional visual distractions. Like last year, I had cats walking across in front of the video screen. There was decor, lights that were going on in the back that were distraction, kids going back and forth, and so it kind of takes away that part of it. Mary, do you want to go over the potential drawbacks?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, when I was talking with Mark in preparation for this, I recalled that I had been doing phone interviews for quite some time. Back in the day before we were accredited, we primarily did in-person interviews because a lot of our applicants were local. As we got accredited and things moved more national to, again, equal the playing field, we moved to phone. We're now, we've been doing Zoom now for a few years, maybe a good well, I don't remember how many years, but it's been a while. I've been a training director for too long. But nonetheless, we'll talk about Zoom interviews in a moment. So yeah, there's lots of reasons why phone is a good backup, but some of the drawbacks might be that, similar to what Shiloh mentioned, the applicants may feel, I've heard the feedback that it sounds like I'm just talking into a black hole. You get no verbal cues, the visual cues that you typically get when you're able to see somebody face to face. So I think both the applicants feel like they cannot sell themselves, and then for the interviewers, it's hard to know, to just attend to some of these other cues that we're used to when we're able to see applicants face to face. So similarly, the applicants might experience it as an impersonal. You do miss a lot when you're not able to see somebody and you are engaged in just a phone voice to voice. And then lastly, similar, we've mentioned this repeatedly, that the traditional visual cues are just missing. So those might be some of the drawbacks. It's just some of the things that we're used to, you're not able to see, but you have to listen very intently for a phone. But it's good to have that backup.
Yeah, and even with the phone, so I have done it to where we've had that speaker phone in the middle of the room that we're all sitting around, and then I've also done it, we're all coming in from different phones, and I know that social distancing is an issue right now, but if possible, it is, and you can all be in a room together, on that speaker phone, it tends to be warmer because you are kind of interacting with one another, and they can pick that up on the other end. And so just know that with phone interviews, there's different levels of intimacy that can be perceived, and that kind of conference call does allow that interaction between the people that are doing the interviewing.
Thank you, Mark. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the video interviews. And so again, the phone is always a good backup if technology fails. Something to be mindful of when you're doing the video interviews is to be clear about the time zones. I know earlier I said good morning and good afternoon because we're all in different time zones. And so it's important to be very clear about what time is 11 o'clock. Is it Central Time, Eastern Time, or Pacific Standard Time, or Hawaii time? And so another important component of doing video interviews is also to have reviewed some Zoom etiquette guidelines with the applicants. So that could be part of the instructions that you send to them. We went over that today, and I think that could be helpful for them as well. How do they present themselves in a professional way, and you as well, because it goes both ways. So with that, also the camera, and how, where are you placing the camera so that you're viewed, and if you are able to do a group, which might not be possible, but just the camera placement is really important so that the way you're being perceived is I think, what am I trying to say, is comfortable for everybody, right? We don't want someone's in there, or again, the cat's walking by. And then someone sent me a private message about the survey evaluation I referenced earlier. I wanted to clarify that the survey that I send applicants is post-selection, so match has already happened. It's only sent to the applicants that I interviewed. I just want some feedback about the interview process. And so that is where I'm able to get information from applicants that what they find helpful, and then what feedback they have that I could incorporate to improve the processes for the next year. So I wanted to clarify that component. So that's sort of just a foundation how to get started with some of the interviews. We're going to offer a few more pieces of information. Mark?
Yeah, and about the time zone, every year I have somebody that kind of messes up with the time zone. So I expect it. And so at OSU, we have, we do a lot of time slots, and I always schedule makeup time slots because of course people get sick and all that. But I also make sure that if someone has missed because of a time zone, which has happened every year I've been training director, that I don't shame them, and I let them have a time to make that up. And as Mary was talking about with the camera and placement, we got some feedback last year because when we would do the group interviews, we'd be in my office and there would be like 3 heads that were in the screen. And so what I intend on doing this year, well, what I hope I can do this year, depending on social distance, is kind of push the camera back a bit. So it's not just a bunch of heads looking in the screen, and so that they can see, you know, hand movements and gestures and things like that. So I'm going to be more conscious about that and coming across warmer than just a bunch of heads just on the screen.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I think I just wanted to highlight again, something Shiloh mentioned is what can you do in these interactions to create a more sense of personal intimacy during the interview that is lost.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, so next slide, please.
All right, so I'll do the benefits again. I'll let you, Mary, do the downside of it.
I'll be the bad guy.
I get to be good. Okay, so benefits. The social justice piece of that is, and you notice there's equal access to more applicants because, you know, phone might be the ultimate equal access factor, and it offers ADA accessibility features. So once again, it just allows more access and more equitability among the applicant pool. It also provides for follow-up sessions with the training director, staff, and current interns. And later on, we'll talk about what we're doing at each site. And so we have an interview, and then there's follow-up sessions that we can have to have kind of more personal interactions. And it provides the opportunity to share screen for interview questions, vignettes, so that, and especially if you haven't prepared them, sent them out beforehand, you can share that. Mary, did you have anything else to add about the share screen thing?
I wanted to, yes, I'll add a little piece there. It's a way to integrate what Shiloh mentioned earlier, an online format. So Zoom, for example, does have a share screen function, and there's also a whiteboard, although it's kind of hard to type in that whiteboard. But nonetheless, I think it allows for two different modes to be integrated. So you can share your interview question. Sometimes folks are writing them down feverishly and trying to remember. Might be helpful just to have the question to view. And then similarly with the vignettes, there might be components that they're not capturing, but have a visual cue might be really helpful. And then I wanted to also add the ADA accessibility. If you do a search for Zoom and ADA, you're going to get access to all of their documents about how to use accessibility features in Zoom. So I think that's just another important social justice component for applicants as well.
Yeah, and then Mary, how about the breakout rooms? That's something that we don't do at OSU.
Correct, and that's something we haven't done either. I might utilize this for our virtual open house to have folks, it allows you to break people out into, I think most folks have probably used this function in webinars and other formats where you can break people out to meet for a brief moment with other folks. Maybe there's a, like for example, I might have folks rotate through different rotation supervisors, and they'll know that they'll be in there for perhaps 10 minutes. They can do a Q&A, and then you can switch. So it does require some technical savvy to be able to do that, and I certainly suggest that you test this out before the actual day. Of course, technology is always going to interfere with our ability to do things seamlessly. But anyway, I haven't used it either, but I've been parts in meetings where we've utilized that feature, and it's actually quite effective.
Yeah, and we do use it in our staff meetings at OSU, at CCS. We have just under 80 staff members, and so when we have to have small discussions in our staff meetings, we do have breakout rooms, and so it's really beneficial to. And they can be assigned randomly, or you can put certain people in certain rooms. So that's been very beneficial. And then we also, we talked about this before, that the applicants do have more access to the social cues, the visual cues in comparison to phone interviews. And so they can get that encouraging nod, you know, as they're speaking, and their nerves are kind of taking over. It's like that reassuring nod they are getting in this interview. And at the same time, you have to be aware that they are getting every cue. And so I always tell the people that are on the interview with me, keep looking at yourself in this, on the camera, because I want you to see what they are seeing. So they are taking visual cues, both positive and possibly not positive. And so just those are things to think about.
Thank you, Mark. Next slide, please. Okay, so potential drawbacks. There's lots of reasons why it's effective, and then there's of course some reasons why it might not be. So one of the things we know is that Zoom offers different versions, right? Some you pay for, some you don't. The free Zoom site does have some time limits in some circumstances. Actually, Mark, you had an example of this.
Yeah, so, and I actually looked at it just this morning to make sure it's still current. And so it does, as long as there are less than 3 on a Zoom conference, it is free, and it's free indefinitely. If you have 3 or more on there, then there is a 40-minute time limit. And so last year I learned that, like, I had one link for the entire day, and I would put people in the waiting room. And so what happens, so the waiting room counts as somebody in that session. And so I was getting, a couple of times during the interview, I was getting knocked out because of the time limit. So what I've learned, that if I do use the free Zoom site, I'm going to use a different one for every interview. And at the same time, just understand that if you have people zooming in from multiple places, that free site, there is a time limit on that. OSU, every student, we have Carmen Zoom, and it's Carmen, Ohio, Carmen Zoom. But everybody has the business Zoom, and so there is no time limit. So that's just something to be aware of, that the time limits on the Zoom. And the other one, it's like $40, at least that's what it was, to upgrade it to the next level.
I know we're all talking about Zoom. Someone posted that WebEx is now limited to 50 minutes. So there are certainly other platforms. I'm not familiar with them, but you can certainly look up other platforms. And so another drawback of video interviews is it does require some technological savvy and also internet stability. Today, unfortunately, we weren't able to include everybody who registered for this webinar because of some limitations that we encountered. And so, yeah, this is going to happen. So, of course, it's helpful to be mindful of this, be flexible and understanding. We're all trying to navigate some new territory here. And that's why, again, because of the internet instability that can happen, it's important to have, again, the phone backup. That should assist with the process. Again, applicants might experience themselves as not being able to sell themselves in the interview process. We've mentioned this in other formats as well, and they might experience the interview as impersonal. So whatever you can do up front to create a more personal and intimate experience would be, I think, really appreciated. Again, go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead, Mary. I'll jump in.
I was just going to finish that the attraction bias, of course, and then the visual distractions are also potential drawbacks. We've mentioned that before.
Yeah. So in the survey that we got, that we sent out after our interview process, we got some really good feedback, and they really loved the Zoom. And they loved them, some of them didn't. But the feedback that we got was they liked the fact that, so in our group interview, I have myself, a staff member, and an intern in there. And they said that they got, because there were like 3 of us in there, they got to see an interaction, and they did get to see kind of what it would be like to work with the training director. They got to see, the interaction between the intern and the training director, and the staff member. So I intend to continue that, because we get a lot of positive feedback when we have, the staff, intern, and training director all in the same room, because they're like, oh, I get a sense that, Mark is approachable. Oh, Mark does have a sense of humor sometimes, things like that. So those are other things to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also have the trainees participate in the interview process, and I think it's good good professional development for them, but also again, that the interaction I think is really important. I think we're
Mary,
done.
before we move on, I have a
Yes.
question for you guys.
Yes.
If everything is equal, are there any situations in which you would recommend phone over video interviews?
Phone over video?
Yes.
Yeah.
Assuming everything is worked out and stable with video interviews.
You know, I used to, so this year everyone went Zoom. Prior to that, I was actually using Skype. And so I did give folks an option. So you can give the applicant the option, do they prefer phone over video? Some folks did because of the internet instability that they cited as being problematic. Again, phone can also be a little bit problematic, right? We all get bad connections. We've had to dial again. And so I don't know why I would choose one over the other, but I might give a choice if the applicant has a preference.
Yeah, I will tell you, I think I was one of the last holdouts, like social justice phones, you know, equal access phones. And so it took me a long while before. I just have been doing Zoom interviews. I think this will be my 3rd year. And I expected to get different feedback. And I really think that, like Mary said, there's always an option. If somebody wants to do the phone, I do always offer that. And we usually end up doing some on phone anyway because of technology. But yeah, I am really right now, I am a proponent for Zoom because I just feel like with the competition for sites, it really allows people to get more of a idea of who I am and the site a bit. And I saw on the comments that somebody wanted a post-interview survey, and we can make that available. I can send our, we just tweak ours a little bit different every year.
You're also asking about how do you consider bias in video interviewing and how to be neutral on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We certainly have a conversation because again, my trainees do participate in the interview process. When I sit down with everybody and have a conversation about the process, we do engage in a conversation about that. And with the trainees in particular, also having discussions about the ethics of the process because they may have peers or friends that are going to be participating in the process the following year. So it's a very frank conversation. And also I ask a question at the beginning to, it's to set the tone and make the applicant as comfortable as possible so that they're not feeling the bias. I'm blanking on the term, I apologize. But anyway, I could send out the question that we asked too. It's basically to, again, sort of clean the slate and then let's all engage in a process here because they're so anxious, they're so nervous anyway. So how can we make them feel as comfortable as possible? Because I want them to perform as best as possible. But we do have conversations about the whole process as a staff and as with the trainees included so that everyone's managing themselves as professionally as possible.
Yeah, and Mary just spurred a memory for me. We talk about bias as our selection committee, and also we also talk about the bias of so-called introversion and extroversion because our selection committee tends to rate the more extroverted people higher, and so we talk about how introversion and extroversion might play out in the interview process, and so we just have conversations about bias and how you can address that and check yourself with that.
All right, thank you guys. Shiloh,
Yes.
back to you. Talk about virtual open houses. It seems like you've been doing this a lot with your various islands, and we'd love to hear more about it.
Nobody wants to fly to Hawaii.
Yeah, well, I think they want to. With our 14-day quarantine, it's extra challenging these days. And previously, it was not the cheapest thing you could do as an intern or a postdoctoral resident candidate. So what we, and last year really tried to emulate, we did a hybrid one last year, is an opportunity to get to know the site in a similar manner as in-person open houses. And this year we'll be moving exclusively to the virtual realm. What I appreciate about the benefits is there's no need to barter for a room. And on an island in Hawaii, space is a big commodity. And so getting a conference room is no small feat. And being able to have virtual alleviates that burden in planning, the travel costs for candidates. There's no need for elaborate directions or getting lost on the way, or some of the other things that actually make for a fairly stressful open house experience. And there's equal access for attendance to all candidates in a selections pool. And one thing we do at our open house is, because it is not part of the formal evaluation process as we describe it, we do not ask names of candidates, because we want to increase the likelihood that they will be able to learn about us without focused on, I paid this money to come to your site so that now you'll have eyes on me and I will somehow jump up the rank list, but really to keep the process as we describe it in our public materials, which is not part of the formal evaluative process. So I do not know individual names of individuals that have attended. For the potential drawbacks, it's harder to do some of those informal connection between candidates, supervisors, and the site, and so there's a little bit more barriers, so the interaction is less organic. Within our setting, we typically had this big potluck lunch when staff all bring together different local foods, and we for 90 minutes gather and eat together and answer questions. And this is a way that we often connect in Hawaii. So losing that this year is a big loss. People are already mourning the loss of this bringing foods and our poi malasadas and all the things that we traditionally eat together during open house. And so we are really talking about how do we convey that same sense of community and collaboration of our staff and sharing without having that, what we see as a very important element to the culture within our facility and also Hawaii. And so what we're looking at is really increasing then more time for either breakout rooms or also then counterbalancing that I'll go into the next slide about. Technology is also not perfect. We've used Skype. We've had success within the VA system of WebEx now going outside the firewall and in, and I've been doing intern orientation virtually over WebEx, and it's actually gone quite well, surprisingly. And there is going to be more effort in planning the tours or having that video and some of the other things where you would just typically give a tour. Now you're going to have to put a lot more thought into it as well. Next slide, please. All right. I think that some of the tips for success I would really identify the most important elements of an open house and map out then the agenda. So for us, part of the important part is that gathering over food, and it's very reflective of some of the ways clinics within our system connect on a regular basis. And so we're still brainstorming, how do we capture that same sense of community in the way that we connect with candidates and convey a sense of who we are, without having that element over or the virtual platform. It's also important to have a reliable platform that you've really tested outside of your system, and the VA is a good example of what may work in your network does not work outside of your network. And I think WebEx has eased that in comparison to Skype, but also considering what Microsoft Teams or Zoom or what would be most conducive within your setting. We found it really helpful to have one person leading the open house and another one responding to the chat box and another one actually solving technology pieces with the candidates. And so really everyone having their job means it can still run efficiently, and those Q&As facilitated through the chat box, just like with webinars. But the bigger the open house, the more important it is to be able to efficiently utilize that chat box as well. We're planning on having more breakout groups with supervisors for particular rotations as well, to be able to have a more intimate setting. And we've included a panel of supervisors to introduce themselves and be able to have Q&A sections and kind of broken out things throughout the day with a very set agenda, so that candidates know how to get their questions asked and get a good sense of us. And also having a private breakout session with our current trainees has been pretty important as well. Want to highlight what Mark and Mary were already hitting on in regards to the different elements with video, and then particularly being able to have a tour in place of those in-person tours can be pretty helpful as well. So it may be that your open house also is shorter than it was in comparison to previous years. And so encourage really looking at what is the most important factors for us to convey in our open house versus we're going to do it the same as we've always done out of habit in terms of length as well. So those are my tips for success regarding virtual open houses.
Thank you, Shiloh. We're going to talk with each of our presenters now about some sample materials that they have prepared for the virtual interviewing. They will be on the slides, and we will continue to update resources on the website. So keep checking back.
All right, this is me. So in the Pacific Islands, we're going to be continuing to conduct our online interviews. We're going to be using Qualtrics. That's what we used last year. Our local site has paid a fee that we also share with other training programs within our system. It's also the way we do some of our didactic feedback as well throughout the training year. We'll include questions about ethics, conceptualization, and diagnosis, and it will also be inclusive of a review of vignettes with associated responses. We are in process of making a YouTube video, and I appreciate, Mark, some of your tips that will further help me as I'm trying to overcome my own technology anxiety and find the balance of what is informative without being too cheesy and weird on a video that we would then post online that can well represent our site. We're going to be conducting a virtual open house via WebEx that includes those breakout sessions with current trainees, panels with supervisors, and also a meeting with the training director. And then throughout the selection season, I'll be spending a lot of time reaching out to candidates and connecting candidates with supervisors or current trainees and spending a lot of time answering additional questions. We've really found that the extra time that we put in early in answering candidates' questions really offsets some of the more removed nature of our online interview system as well. And we also provide cultural readings and references for those individuals who may have an idea of what Hawaii is based off of tourism industry versus the reality of living here, so that it can be a really good informed decision as well.
And Wayne's up next, if we could have the next slide.
So I'm sharing kind of a rough skeleton of what we plan to do at Minneapolis VA for our internship. And this pretty much mimics what we have done in person for many years, and feel that we've been able to kind of recreate this in a way that will make sense. We have always offered kind of telephone and virtual interviews and have done components of this, and it's worked fairly well. Expect everything to go a little bit better this year because applicants are much more skilled in using this technology, and we've learned a lot as well too. So we do kind of an open presentation doing an overview of the program, and would do this through Zoom, but we may convert to MS Teams after we get some experience with using that and the pros and cons of that. And then we would have applicants introduce themselves. We would have 3 interview days and about like 18 to 20 applicants on each day, so that there could, it wouldn't be as overwhelming. Then following that, we have our diversity enhancement team come and do a presentation and talk about kind of our philosophy, training curriculum in that regarding diversity and culture. And then our research team comes in, and this is all done through Zoom, and we would do it on the same continuous link. Overview of research opportunities by staff, which is an elective, not all interns are required to do that. Within each of these, there would be some time at the end of each section for people to type in questions and have those responded to. and then giving people a break, which is certainly still essential to give them time off kind of camera. And then 2 in-person interviews through Zoom with 1 staff person. Those are fairly open-ended. There are a couple performance-based questions that we use, but that's pretty straightforward with what we have done in the past in terms of the individual applicant. And then a lunch, again, where they're off camera, they're not having to meet with anybody, they can recollect themselves. And then could we get the next slide? And then this is probably the most complicated part, and we will likely modify this as we learn more about how to do this. We have done these like speed rotations where there's 20 tables in this very large space, and we actually ring a bell after 6 to 8 minutes, and people go from table to table, and they can choose to meet with several of the supervisory staff as they needed. We think that we can recreate this through Zoom. Part of this will be is we're going to develop short videos of each of our rotation and adjunctive trainings with kind of the main lead in that area and maybe 1 or 2 of the other staff. And again, to have them professional, but not super, super polished, is we really want to communicate more of the human aspect of that. Applicants could view these a few days before their interview. We don't want to make them kind of public forever. And on YouTube, we can load them up as a hidden link, so you can't search on them, but with a direct link, the applicants can access them. And so they can get a sense of what the experience is and make some decisions during the speed rotation time, which groups they want to attend to. And we would limit the number of applicants in each of these rooms. So more to come on how we're actually going to figure that out. And then there would be a break and then meeting with our current interns. As I noted in the chat, this is non-evaluative, and applicants think this is really one of the most important things they do, to be able to kind of ask those questions and count on a candid response. And unless COVID improves dramatically, we would have the interns in different rooms meeting with everybody virtually. And then at the very end, we will do a virtual tour, which I'll have some video we can show through Zoom, and then answer some questions that people would have. And that would either be through chat, and then we're toying with the idea, I don't know how overwhelming it would be to actually have people verbally ask questions and enable that with maybe 18 people in the room, but that's a work in progress. So just a sample of what we've done, and all programs are different on how they may organize their interview process.
Thank you, Wayne. Let's move on to the next slide. Mary, you're up.
All right, so this is a quick little description of what's going to be our virtual open house this year. We typically invite all applicants after they've interviewed for the open house, so it has no evaluative component. And the way it's typically broken down is that they meet with, we're going to miss this year because it won't be in person, much like Shiloh referenced. We provide a light lunch, and so there's a socializing and this sort of chatter that happens. That it's just nice to get to know people before we sit down and then formally do introductions. And we basically have a panel. So the intern applicants are able to hear from each supervisor of different areas of the program, do some Q&A. Then we take a quick break. They meet then after that with the current interns alone. There is no supervisory staff there, so they can really ask the questions they want to. And then after that, we wrap up with we used to wrap up with a tour of the center, but now we'll be doing all of this by Zoom. So there'll be a panel of supervisors. We will step out and they'll meet with the trainees, and then they'll have access to a virtual tour of CAPS.
Mark, you're next. Thank you, Mary.
Oh, that was my agenda, yeah.
All right, so I have a pretty bad storm outside, so if I disappear, you all know why. So I have 2 slides here that I'm going to go real quick, because the second one is just how we're planning on doing our virtual training so that we're able to talk to them about that if this continues next year. So we do Zoom interviews, and the first 2 weeks of January, everybody gets an individual interview with myself, a staff member, and an intern. And so they are just, 2 weeks of back-to-back interviews. And we do between 40 and 45 interviews at Ohio State. And then we also have the site tour that you saw that's online. And we reference that when we send out our invitation to interview, so that they know that they can look at that and ask more questions about that. And then after the interview, so once again, the interviews with myself, with me and a staff member and an intern, and it's very interactive. And then we have optional follow-ups. And so there's an optional follow-up for a kind of conversation with the training director time and a conversation with current interns. And then we also have optional individual follow-up meetings. So they're invited to talk with me and with our current interns. And I want to point out, if they want a one-on-one talk with an intern about their experience, I tell them that we understand that this is a really important decision, and I don't want them to feel apprehensive about asking questions, feeling like they might be evaluated on questions. And so I tell them that they do have a confidential time with an intern to ask questions so that they can make a decision that matches their needs. And those interns will not talk about that meeting with the selection committee, and we won't even know who has called. And so I just want to point out that always gets high marks in our surveys that we offer that. And then we do have, if it's permitted, we have optional in-person tour by an intern, and this also is confidential. Just to make the playing field even, they are told that they're welcome to come on site, but they won't be introduced to myself or to any of the selection committee, just to make it fair to the people that can't come on site. So that's kind of like our interviewing process. And then the next slide, just really quickly, is if they ask, how the heck are you gonna do it in these times? And so our clinical work is a hybrid of telemental health, Zoom, and in person. And we are using sign-out group rooms to allow for social distancing, so that our interns can get some in-person experience. And so they will be doing Zoom from either at home or their individual intern offices, but for in-person, we have group rooms that they can sign out so that they can get some in-person experience. And also our group rooms are also used for our interactive assessments. And so we have the screens up and the gloves and the mask and so forth, because we do learning disability and ADHD assessments that are interactive. And then our sessions are both recorded and live observation. So we record them and keep them on a secure drive, and supervisors also jump in on Zoom and live observe. They just turn off their camera and their microphone, and they get some live observations. And our supervisors have been doing that over the summer, and it's been a real valuable tool. And then with our trainings, all of our trainings are facilitated via Zoom, because our staff are not required to be on site all the time. But for social distancing, I have reserved a large room, so that if we are able for the trainees to come in and watch that together, the facilitator on Zoom, that we can all have that shared experience. So those are kind of examples of how we are kind of navigating the hybrid of kind of what's coming up.
Thank you, Mark.
Right.
I'm struck by how this last point you made, where you're talking about how you manage COVID, goes back to one of our guiding principles of transparency and letting applicants know how each has sort of individually managed the crisis and what they might expect if they end up at the site, should this threat not go away immediately or in the nearest future.
Yes, and I have also had a meeting with our incoming interns for this year when we figure this out, so that they know what's coming up.
Yeah.
So they have been informed of all this too.
Thank you to our presenters. Jeff, the next slide, please. We are going to sort of finish up with sharing some resources with you. These are on our website. I will be on the website, but we have tips from program directors. Our colleagues in medicine will also be doing medical school interviews, residency and fellowship interviews virtually this year. And they have actually been doing virtual interviews for a while now. So I think they're slightly ahead of most of us. I see Shiloh, Mark, and Mary as really trailblazers in the psychology field, similar sites that have prioritized social justice and equity by not having in-person interviews. But there are some wonderful resources out there already. The APIC board has put together a tip sheet that you can find on the website. We're going to try and organize the resources under the link for the slides and the chat to this call. Jeff, did you want to add anything about the website and resources?
Yes, I had posted to chat. We are welcome of any training resource that you might have out there that you feel might be helpful, and we will post that on our training resources site there. We take no final responsibility for the quality, etc. We try to provide some good resources, but you will need to apply those to your site as they fit.
Thank you. We have references on the next slide that we've used to inform our presentation today. You can find those on the website as well, and these slides will be up there. And we'd like to have a few minutes. We have 10 minutes for questions. We've been attempting to address questions as they come up in the chat, but if anyone has questions, please feel free to speak up. Remember to unmute yourself when you ask your question.
I'll share too, there was a question in the chat about having always only had private one-on-one interactions for recruitment and selection with applicants, and any advice from folks who have welcomed groups of applicants at the same time to make that go smoothly and feel like you're not sharing any inappropriate information. So if anyone has thoughts about that, that was a question in the chat. And we welcome, of course, any other chat or verbal questions.
While we're waiting for questions, I'll just remind everybody I'll be sending them a link to the evaluation of this presentation, as well as a link to the recording of this in case you came in a little bit late, and apologize for that again, but we finally got it opened up for everyone, as well as a copy of the chat, or link to the chat. So all these resources will be available to you as part of this, and thank everyone for participating today or showing up today. And again, sorry about the delay.
I've already gotten some emails from people who were on this call sharing resources that we will take a look at and upload to the website. We are certainly keeping our central office busy with cultivating our sense of a community and sharing the wealth of information that we all have, and is somewhat siloed because we connect best with other training directors at other sites and don't have as many opportunities as we would like to interact in person.
Maybe to answer the question about applicants seeing each other, I don't have a concern about that because it's not evaluative. When we have the open house, it is us providing them with information, them asking questions, and us providing more information. I know there are sites where the interviews happen in bundles and folks come for the day, and so there might be more mingling. I don't know how that's managed. I don't know if anybody on the panel does interviews that way, or if there's anybody in the audience who might want to share that, how they manage that.
This is Wayne. We've done smaller groups of like 6 when we've done virtual interviews in the past. So the informational sessions with training directors at the end of the meeting is kind of interactive, and we've had as many as 6 in there. And they benefit from each other's questions. So there's a lot of value in having that group format. And as long as they're aware that, and they can see the other people on there, they're aware that other people are there, and they're not having a one-on-one meeting, it has worked really well, and don't see a lot of concerns. My concerns come in much larger groups where there's many people, and then how to manage that from a logistic perspective. But I think people benefit from hearing what other people's questions are. Maybe it's something they didn't think about, or something that they didn't feel assertive enough to ask.
And back to the earlier point of public materials, as long as I think this is noted, it's, you know, the students know what to expect for the interview process.
I had a question, actually. But it's based on something that happened on our campus. We had a very large meeting. It wasn't through the counseling center, but where there was a really rather horrific kind of Zoom bombing. And so I'm wondering what people are doing or thinking of doing with regards to that possibility.
Yeah, Patricia, I can answer that. So all of our Zoom appointments have a password attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something new that OSU, they actually require it now. And so when you send out the link to the email, there's a password. So they have to sign in to do that.
And,
so
and
that
Zoom,
happened with us.
And Zoom now requires you to enable your waiting room. So you are the one that admits people to that session.
Yeah, that's a default now, the waiting room. And so you have to uncheck it if you don't want it now. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if they allow unchecking it, Mark.
Yeah, I do. I do that. I uncheck
Okay.
all of my internal ones.
Great, thank you.
Oh, sorry. I had a question, please. My apologies if this has come up before. Any concerns about the security of interview materials that might be shared through the online platform, be it Zoom or another one? For example, if we're putting up vignettes or anything like that?
So we actually change ours from year to year, and we'll alter them because we did find one year someone that the following year answered it a little too perfectly. And it really, we thought, 30 minutes and you whiz through this, like have my job. So it really brought up that we switch it around and we alter it so that even if someone, you know, wasn't doing the most professional or ethical thing and shared those materials, that they don't have a head start anyway, because we've changed it.
And we change ours yearly as well. What about in the context of the same kind of interviewing cohort? Because for example, in our case, we interview on 2 different Thursdays. So let's say the Thursday one interviewees somehow downloaded or copied that vignette, which would be the same for the next week's interview. I don't know if there's any preventative measures.
It
Not
seems
necessarily.
Like this is the EPPP and 5 different versions of the exam.
Yeah.
And where there's a way to cheat, somebody will cheat.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
One obvious cheat in an online interview is if it took you 20 minutes to fill out something that everyone else took 3 hours to do, which is our typical timeline we allow, that gives us a little, very perfect in 20 minutes. What happened here? And
you
gives
don't
us
want to be
pause.
a suspect.
Yeah. So I think Jeff is right. And I think we can only do what we can do. And what I would say is, like, what are the other data points in the overall review of an applicant that suggest, you know, their overall goodness of fit or ranking versus that. But that can be helpful in the time stamping. We also ask them to enter when you started and when you finished. And what we have found is a few times someone actually took 12 hours and said that they took two hours. And so it's kind of an interesting data point that we take into consideration as well.
I didn't know psychologists were sociopaths. I'm sorry. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end. We do appreciate this. APIC is going to have additional webinars. Want to invite everyone to the APIC business meeting. That's actually made up of membership folks there. We usually have that at APA, but we are scheduling that to be on Thursday, August 6th at 2 p.m. Central, but we will be sending that announcement out today or Monday. And I think there's a couple of other training seminars that we're putting together, webinars that we're going to discuss. And now that I've magically discovered that you have to give yourself permission to allow more than 100 people to be in the room, we're set for future seminars.
So we welcome you all at the APIC business meeting. It is for every single one of our members who pays membership dues. Please come and join us on August 6th at 2 o'clock Central. We'll send out the link. Thank you.
And someone had one more comment about the Zoom bombing. You can turn off that annotate thing for drawing on there. So if you turn that off or lock that, that'll also stop some of that. But just wanted to end with that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, folks.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.